My mother told me to change every PIN 5 minutes after the divorce was finalized. That night, my ex tried to spend $740,000 on my card. The waiter came back with one sentence. My mother called me at 4:52 p.m., 11 minutes after the judge signed the final decree, and her first sentence was, "Not congratulations, or how are you feeling, or anything resembling comfort. Change every PIN you have," she said, "right now, before you do anything else today." I want to be honest about how strange this sounded to me in the moment, because I had just walked out of a courtroom in downtown Phoenix after 14 months of mediation and filings, and the specific exhausting attrition of a divorce that had, by every external measure, already ended weeks earlier in spirit and was only now ending on paper. I was tired. I wanted to go home and sit on my couch and not think about banking for a while. "Mom," I said, "it's done. Why does this matter right this second?" "Because Trevor knows it's done too," she said, "and he has had 14 months to plan what he does in the 5 minutes after he finds out." I did not fully understand what she meant until that night. My name is Camilla Reyes. I'm 31 years old. I'm a pharmaceutical sales representative based in Phoenix, a job that requires a specific combination of relationship management and discipline that I would come to understand over the following months had prepared me far better than I expected for the particular discipline required of someone extracting herself financially from a marriage to a man like Trevor Ashby. I married Trevor 4 years before the divorce. He was charismatic in the specific, frictionless way that charismatic men often are, quick with a story, generous in restaurants, the kind of person who made every room feel slightly more interesting by entering it. He worked nominally as an independent financial consultant, a title that I came to understand over the years of our marriage, described almost nothing real about what he actually did with his time or his money. What he actually did, I learned in the final 18 months of our marriage, was spend considerably more than he earned, consistently, across multiple categories: a leased car he couldn't afford, a series of investment opportunities that never produced returns, recreational gambling that started small and grew, by the time I discovered the full pattern, into something that had quietly consumed tens of thousands of dollars across our joint accounts. My mother, Lourdes, had been suspicious of Trevor from the engagement onward, not loudly, not in a way that created family conflict, but with the specific watchful patience of a woman who had, in her own first marriage decades earlier, learned exactly what financial charm looks like from the inside, having lived through my biological father's gambling addiction before she left him when I was 6 years old. She had never said "I told you so" during the marriage. She had simply waited, with the particular grim readiness of someone who has seen this movie before and knows precisely which scene comes next. The divorce itself had been complicated, but not because Trevor contested the major terms. He didn't, largely, because his attorney had advised him, correctly, that the financial misconduct I had documented made contesting the settlement a losing strategy. What had made the 14 months difficult was something subtler: Trevor's specific talent for appearing cooperative in every formal proceeding while quietly testing, in small and almost undetectable ways, whether any financial access still remained available to him. 6 weeks before the final decree, I had discovered that he had attempted to use an old authorized user designation on a credit card I had opened during our marriage and forgotten to formally close, a card with a $4,000 limit that he had maxed out at a casino in Laughlin over a single weekend before I caught the alert and canceled the card entirely. I should have understood from that moment exactly what my mother was warning me about. I understood it fully only after that night at the restaurant. The first sign of what was coming had actually appeared 3 weeks before the final hearing, during what should have been a routine settlement conference at our respective attorneys' offices. My attorney, a woman named Diane Castellanos, 19 years in family law, the specific calm precision of someone who has watched every variety of divorce-adjacent financial behavior and stopped being surprised by any of it, had pulled me aside after the conference. "I want you to do something before the final decree," she said. "I want a complete inventory of every account, every card, every authorized user designation that has ever had Trevor's name attached to it in any capacity, even accounts you believe are already closed or already separated." "I think I've already done that," I said. "Do it again," Diane said, more carefully. People in Trevor's financial position are very good at leaving small access points open, the kind that look irrelevant until the moment they're not. I did the inventory again, more carefully, over the following week. I found, embedded in a banking app I rarely used, a secondary debit card linked to a joint savings account that Trevor and I had opened in the second year of our marriage, and that I had assumed, incorrectly, had been closed during the financial separation process 8 months earlier. The account itself held only $312, a balance too small to matter on its own. But the debit card associated with that account was also, I discovered upon closer inspection of the bank's back-end settings, linked as a secondary payment method on a premium dining and concierge service that Trevor and I had subscribed to during the early years of our marriage, the kind of service that allows last-minute restaurant reservations and, more relevantly, allows registered members to charge significant amounts directly to a linked account with minimal real-time verification, designed for the convenience of high-spending members who don't want friction at checkout. The account had been functionally dormant for 8 months. The dining service subscription, however, had never been formally canceled. I closed the account immediately upon discovering this. I assumed that was the end of it. It was not. My mother's warning on the phone, 11 minutes after the decree, turned out to be specific rather than generally cautious, because she had learned something I hadn't yet learned myself. "Trevor called your Aunt Soledad 2 days ago," she told me, still on that same phone call, fishing for information. "He asked her casually whether you'd already cleaned everything up financially or whether there was still some overlap left to sort through. Soledad told me right after because she thought it sounded strange." "What did you tell her to tell him?" "Nothing yet," my mother said. "I wanted to warn you first. Cammy, I need you to actually do this. Today. Not tomorrow." I changed every banking PIN I had within the hour. Checking, savings, the 2 remaining credit cards in my name alone. I called my primary bank's fraud department and asked them to flag my accounts for enhanced verification on any transaction above $500, a service most banks offer but few customers think to request. What I did not do, because I did not yet know it existed, was check the dining and concierge service again. I had closed the joint savings account it was linked to. I had not realized, because the service's customer interface did not make this obvious, that closing the underlying bank account did not automatically remove the card as a registered payment method on the service's own platform. It simply meant that any charge routed through that specific card would now bounce, generating an immediate decline rather than a successful payment, unless the service had, as a backup, an alternative payment method on file for the account that would be charged automatically if the primary method failed. Trevor, I would learn that night, had added precisely such a backup method 4 months earlier, during a period when we were both still nominally sharing access to certain joint subscriptions pending the final separation of accounts, a small, easily overlooked decision at the time, made before either of us fully understood how contentious the divorce would eventually become. The backup method was a credit card in my name, one I had opened during the marriage and had, in the chaos of closing a dozen other accounts during the separation, simply forgotten still existed, because Trevor had been the one who originally suggested opening it for household emergencies, and had handled the initial paperwork himself. I had a $750,000 credit limit on that card, a fact that requires some explanation. It was a premium private banking card, issued as part of a relationship benefit tied to a substantial trust account my late grandfather had established for me years before Trevor and I ever met, an account Trevor knew about, had asked about more than once during our marriage, and had never been granted any actual access to, though the credit card itself, linked loosely to my private banking relationship rather than directly to the trust, had a limit that reflected my overall financial profile rather than my checking account balance. I had used that card perhaps a dozen times in 4 years, almost always for major purchases I paid off immediately. I had not closed it during the divorce because my attorney and I had, frankly, both overlooked it amid the dozen other accounts that needed immediate attention, an oversight I understand fully now, and one that nearly cost me far more than money. Trevor used the dining and concierge service that same evening at 8:40 p.m. at a restaurant in Scottsdale called Marchetti's, a high-end Italian place known for an expensive private wine cellar that members of the concierge service could access for wine cellar experiences, private dinners structured around extraordinarily rare bottles, the kind of evening that exists specifically for people who want to spend a great deal of money very quickly in a controlled, ceremonial setting. He had booked, I learned later through the restaurant's own incident report, a private wine cellar experience for what the booking described as a celebration with close friends, a party of 6 featuring 4 bottles from the restaurant's rare reserve list, including notably a 1982 vintage that the restaurant's own records valued at $310,000 on its own, plus 3 additional bottles ranging from $95,000 to $180,000 each, plus the dinner service itself. The total bill, once the wine selections and dinner were finalized, came to $740,600. Trevor presented the dining service's membership card at the end of the meal, the same card linked, through the backup payment method, directly to my $750,000 limit private banking card, a card he had never been authorized to use, had never possessed physically, and accessed entirely through the dining service's internal payment routing, rather than any physical card swipe. The restaurant's payment system processed the charge through the dining concierge service's back end, which in turn routed the payment request to my card issuer. My card issuer's fraud detection system, the same enhanced verification I had requested that very afternoon on every account in my name, following my mother's warning, flagged the transaction immediately, not declined outright at first. Flagged for verification, per the protocol I had requested hours earlier, which required a real-time confirmation call to my personal phone before any transaction above $500 could be approved. I was at home, on my couch, eating reheated pasta, and trying to feel something resembling relief about the day, when my phone rang from a number I recognized as my bank's fraud line. "We have a pending transaction for $740,600 at a restaurant called Marchetti's in Scottsdale," the representative said. "Can you confirm whether you're authorizing this charge?" I sat very still for a moment. "No," I said. "I am not at that restaurant. I did not authorize that charge. Please decline it and lock the card immediately. Understood, she said. The card is now locked, and the transaction has been declined. I sat on my couch with my phone in my hand for a long moment, processing the size of the number I had just heard out loud. $740,600. On a card my ex-husband had access to through a subscription service neither of us had thought to cancel. On the same night his divorce became official, at a dinner he had booked, I would later confirm, for himself and 5 friends, to celebrate what the restaurant's own booking notes described as a fresh start. He had planned, as far as I can reconstruct it, to walk away from his 14-month marriage to a financially disciplined woman who had finally extracted every other point of access he had, and execute one final enormous transaction on a card he assumed I had forgotten about, on the very night the decree made it legally irrelevant whether I would ever forgive him for it. He had not anticipated that I would change every pin within the hour, that my mother would have warned me through my aunt's tip, or that a fraud detection system, configured precisely for this scenario hours earlier, would intercept the charge before it ever reached a final, irreversible state. What happened at the restaurant itself, I learned through Diane and through a formal incident statement the restaurant's manager later provided, was this. The waiter assigned to Trevor's table, a man named Adrian Foley, according to the restaurant's records, had stepped away after presenting the bill to process the payment through the back-of-house system. He returned to the table several minutes later, after the decline notification had processed, and delivered, according to 2 of Trevor's own dinner guests, who later corroborated the account in writing as part of the legal proceedings that followed, a single sentence. "I'm sorry, sir," Adrian said, "but your card has been declined and the account has been flagged." Trevor, by every account I received, attempted first to laugh it off, suggesting a system error, offering an alternative card that turned out to have insufficient available credit to cover even a fraction of the bill. The evening ended, according to the restaurant's incident report, with Trevor's dinner guests quietly splitting an emergency partial payment to cover what the restaurant would allow them to settle that night, with the remainder placed under formal dispute pending resolution. A dispute that, because the charge had never actually been authorized by me, the dining services underlying account holder, was resolved within 2 weeks entirely in my favor, with the full amount voided and the dining concierge service permanently terminating Trevor's membership access for violation of its terms of service regarding unauthorized account use. I did not attend that dinner. I did not see any of it happen, but I have thought many times since about the specific shape of that sentence. Your card has been declined and the account has been flagged, delivered to a man who had spent 14 months performing cooperation in every courtroom and every mediation session while quietly preserving exactly this kind of access. On the theory, I can only assume that I would be too exhausted, too relieved for the divorce to finally be over, to notice one overlooked subscription service on the single most important night for him to test it. He was wrong about that. He was wrong because my mother had lived through exactly this kind of man once before, decades earlier, and had never once let herself forget what vigilance in the final hour actually requires. Diane filed a formal complaint with the dining concierge service the following morning, along with a cease and desist letter to Trevor directly, making clear that any further attempt to access any account, card, or service linked even indirectly to my name would result in immediate legal action for attempted financial fraud, separate and apart from the existing divorce proceedings. The dining service's own internal investigation, completed within 3 weeks, confirmed that Trevor had added himself as a backup payment contact on the account, using information obtained during the marriage, before the accounts had been formally separated, and that his continued use of that access after the accounts were meant to be separated constituted a clear violation of both the service's terms and potentially applicable fraud statutes. He was not criminally charged. I want to be clear about that because I did not pursue criminal charges on Diane's advice, given that the charge had never actually been completed or funds transferred, and given my own preference to close this chapter of my life with the cleanest possible exit rather than an extended legal entanglement. But the formal record exists. The incident report exists. The voided $746,600 charge, the canceled membership, the cease and desist, all of it sits, documented in a file Diane still maintains, in case it is ever relevant again. I have been in therapy since the divorce finalized, with a therapist named Dr. Eleanor Voss, who specializes in financial control dynamics within relationships, a phrase I had never encountered before, but which described with uncomfortable precision 4 years of my marriage that I had spent gradually, almost imperceptibly, training myself to ignore. She asked me once, "What do you think your mother understood about Trevor that you didn't for so long?" I thought about that for a long time before I had an answer. "She understood that charm and competence aren't the same thing," I said. I kept waiting for the charm to eventually become competence. It never did. It was always just charm, covering for the absence of anything underneath it. My mother and I had dinner 2 weeks after the restaurant incident, not at Marchetti's, somewhere much smaller and far less expensive, a place she'd been going to for 20 years. "You scared me with that phone call," I told her. 11 minutes after the decree. I scared myself too, she said. I just knew. I've watched that exact kind of man run that exact kind of play before. I wasn't going to let it work twice in this family. I think about that dinner often, about the specific hard-won vigilance of a woman who had lived through her own version of Trevor decades earlier and had simply refused, ever since, to let herself be slow on the one night it would have mattered most. The card is closed now. The trust is restructured with Diane's help in a way that removes any possibility of this particular vulnerability ever existing again. And my mother, when she calls now, mostly just asks how I'm doing. That, more than anything, is how I know it's finally, actually over.